I want to tell you about Daisy. She's 68 now, a retired school librarian who always carried herself with quiet dignity. Her hair, silver and soft, falls just above her shoulders, and she has that gentle smile that makes you feel instantly at ease. For years, she prided herself on living a simple life. Morning walks with her neighbor, tending to her small rose garden, and reading with her grandchildren on the weekends. But behind that calm exterior, something had been troubling her, something she didn't dare speak about until it became impossible to ignore. It started with small things. She would feel unusually tired after lunch, her eyelids heavy as though weighed down by bricks. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night, her mouth parched and her heart beating just a little too fast. She brushed it off, telling herself it was just age or maybe stress. But then came the day that truly shook her. Daisy had been helping her granddaughter with a school project, carefully gluing pieces of colored paper together when suddenly she felt dizzy. The room swayed, her hands trembled, and she had to sit down quickly before she collapsed. Her family insisted she visit the doctor that very week. Sitting in the cool, sterile room, Daisy listened as the physician spoke words she had feared but never expected to hear so directly. Type 2 diabetes. It was as though the ground shifted beneath her feet. She remembered nodding slowly, hearing phrases like blood sugar control, dietary adjustments, and long-term management, but in her heart she felt only one thing: fear. Fear of what this meant for her future, fear of losing the independence she cherished, and fear that she might become a burden on the very family she had always cared for. That night, Daisy lay awake staring at the ceiling. The shadows of her room stretched long across the walls, and every sound of the clock seemed louder than usual. She thought about her father, who had also struggled with diabetes and suffered complications that eventually took his life far too soon. The memory was sharp, and it made her eyes sting with unshed tears. She whispered to herself, "I don't want to go down that same road. Not me. Not now." And yet, as heavy as that fear was, something else stirred inside her too: determination. Daisy had always been resilient. She had guided countless students through their studies, raised 2 children almost single-handedly after her husband passed, and kept her small home filled with warmth no matter the season. If she could do all that, she thought, then surely she could face this too. It wouldn't be easy, but perhaps, just perhaps, this diagnosis wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new one. The days that followed were filled with changes, some overwhelming and others surprisingly simple. Daisy sat at her kitchen table with a notebook, scribbling down what the doctor had said, trying to make sense of it all. She flipped through cookbooks, frowned at the sugar content in her pantry items, and wondered if she would ever taste sweetness again without guilt or fear. At first, she felt robbed, as though life had snatched away one of its simplest pleasures. But then she remembered something her doctor had said gently, almost like a reassurance. Not all sweetness is forbidden. Some of it can be your friend. That idea stayed with her. Could it be true? Could there be foods, even sweet ones, that didn't work against her but rather walked beside her, helping her regain balance? The thought intrigued her. Slowly, she began to explore, reading stories of others like her, watching short clips on senior health, and even visiting the local farmer's market with new eyes. Where she once saw only baskets of fruit she believed were off limits, she began to wonder if some of them might hold the very key to feeling better. I remember the day she told me about her first discovery. We were sitting on her porch, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold. She leaned closer, her voice soft but full of a spark I hadn't heard in weeks. "Did you know," she said, "that some fruits can actually help lower blood sugar? That they don't just taste sweet, they work with your body, not against it?" There was a light in her eyes as she spoke, the kind that comes when someone who felt lost suddenly finds a path again. It wasn't just about the fruit, of course. It was about what it symbolized. For Daisy, it was proof that she wasn't helpless, that her diagnosis didn't mean surrender. Instead, it opened a door to learning, experimenting, and finding small joys in places she had overlooked before. Every apple she sliced, every berry she washed, every bite she took without fear, each became a quiet victory. Her family noticed the change too. Her son told me she laughed more again, the kind of laugh that reached her eyes. Her granddaughter proudly boasted that Grandma eats better snacks than anyone else now. And Daisy herself began walking longer each morning, her steps steady, her breathing stronger. She carried herself differently, not as someone defeated by illness, but as someone reclaiming her life piece by piece. What struck me most was how her story reminded me of so many others I've seen. Seniors who feel at first as though a diagnosis is a prison sentence, only to discover that with the right shifts, it becomes a new chapter, one filled with resilience, discovery, and unexpected sweetness. Daisy's journey had just begun, and already it was teaching her that health isn't about giving up, but about choosing differently, wisely, and lovingly. And that's what this story is truly about, not just 5 fruits, or recipes, or even blood sugar levels, but the way one woman found hope again when fear threatened to take it away. It's about how something as simple as a piece of fruit held in the palm of your hand can remind you that life still has flavors worth savoring. Daisy may have felt her world collapse in that doctor's office, but here, months later, she had found a new kind of sweetness, one she could embrace without fear. Daisy sat at the kitchen table one quiet morning, the soft light of dawn spilling across the wood surface. Before her lay a single pear, its golden green skin catching the light. She stared at it longer than she meant to, as if it were some forbidden treasure. For years, fruit had been a comfort. Slices of apple tucked into her grandchildren's lunchboxes, bowls of strawberries on Sunday afternoons, the occasional peach eaten over the sink with juice running down her wrist. Now, after her diagnosis, she felt as though every piece of fruit carried a warning label. Sweetness, once simple, had become dangerous. She remembered the doctor's words vividly, like a tape replaying in her mind. "Your blood sugar levels are too high, Daisy. We'll need to manage them carefully now." His voice had been gentle, but the weight of it pressed on her chest long after she left the office. That night, she'd pushed away a bowl of grapes offered by her daughter, her heart aching as she saw her granddaughter's puzzled look. "Why don't you eat them, Grandma? You love grapes." Daisy had forced a smile, saying she wasn't hungry, but inside she felt hollow. What if every sweet thing she loved was now off limits? The fear lingered in her, fear of making a mistake, fear of what a single wrong bite could do to her already fragile balance. She found herself eyeing foods with suspicion, as though they were enemies disguised as friends. Yet even as she struggled, a quiet longing tugged at her. Life without sweetness felt empty, as though something vital was missing. Daisy had endured loss before, her husband's passing, the quiet evenings when the house felt too big. But this loss felt sharper, like a thief stealing joy from her daily meals. Her turning point came unexpectedly. One Saturday, her son stopped by with a paper bag of groceries. He set them on the counter and began pulling out items, chatting about the weather, the grandkids' school projects, little everyday things. Then he held up 2 apples, bright red and shiny. "I got these for you, Mom. I read somewhere they're actually good for blood sugar." Daisy frowned, skeptical. Good for blood sugar? She almost laughed at the thought, but her son insisted, placing one gently into her hand. "Don't peel it. The skin's where the magic is." That night, Daisy sliced the apple into thin pieces and stared at them on the plate. She took a cautious bite, the crunch filling the quiet kitchen. The flavor was familiar, yet strange, a sweetness softened by relief. For the first time since her diagnosis, she didn't feel guilty eating fruit. She chewed slowly, almost reverently, and felt something shift inside her. Maybe not all sweetness was her enemy. Maybe, just maybe, some of it could still belong to her. The next morning, she noticed something different. She didn't feel the same crushing fatigue after breakfast. Her walk with her neighbor felt lighter, easier, as though her steps had more purpose. Daisy couldn't say for sure if the apple had made the difference, but it gave her something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. That afternoon, she sat on her porch and thought about her father again, about how diabetes had stolen so much from him. She whispered softly, "I'll do this differently. I'll find a way." Her granddaughter visited later, carrying a crayon drawing of a garden. "See, Grandma," she said proudly. "There's you, picking apples." Daisy smiled, touched by the innocence of it. She glanced at the picture and then at the real apple tree growing down the street. It seemed symbolic, a reminder that life had a way of planting hope where you least expected it. She decided then that she wouldn't let fear dictate every bite she took. She would learn, she would listen to her body, and she would find sweetness that healed instead of harmed. That night, she called her sister, who lived 2 towns over. They spoke for an hour, Daisy sharing her fears and her small victories. Her sister listened, then said something that stayed with her. "Maybe it's not about what you can't have, Daisy. Maybe it's about finding the things that still love you back." Daisy closed her eyes, letting the words settle into her heart. Yes, that was it. Not everything sweet was dangerous. Some things, like that crisp apple, could love her back. In the days that followed, Daisy began experimenting. She carried an apple in her handbag when she went to the market, slicing it up as a mid-morning snack. She left bowls of pears on her counter, their fragrance filling the kitchen. For the first time, she paid attention not only to flavor, but to how she felt afterward. No sharp crashes of energy, no heavy fog pressing down on her. Just a steady calmness, a rhythm that felt sustainable. It wasn't a miracle cure, but it was a beginning. Her doctor noticed the change at her next checkup. Looking at her chart, he smiled. "You've made progress, Daisy. Keep doing whatever you're doing." She nodded quietly, but inside she wanted to laugh with relief. She was doing it, not through harsh diets or impossible restrictions, but through small, gentle shifts that made sense to her life. Daisy realized something profound then. Her diagnosis didn't have to be a sentence of deprivation. It could be an invitation to discover, to adapt, to reclaim joy in new ways. And with each bite of fruit she once thought forbidden, she was learning not only how to live with diabetes, but how to live fully again. Daisy thought she had finally found her footing after discovering that apples and pears could still belong in her world. But the journey was far from over. For weeks, she carried those familiar fruits in her bag, slicing them into thin wedges and savoring them without fear. Each bite reassured her that sweetness was not entirely lost. Yet, a question kept tugging at her whenever she sat quietly at night. If such simple fruits could help her, what else had she never been told? Why had no one ever said that not every sweet thing was dangerous? She wondered if doctors sometimes held back, not out of cruelty, but perhaps because they assumed seniors wouldn't understand or wouldn't want to change. One day, during her regular walk with her neighbor Marjorie, Daisy confessed her lingering doubts. "I keep thinking," she said softly, "there must be other foods like this. Things that don't just taste good but actually help us." Marjorie nodded knowingly. She had her own struggles with blood pressure and cholesterol. "Doctors never tell us everything," she said, shaking her head. "They give us the basics, the prescriptions, but sometimes the real secrets are in the small things we do each day." Her words struck Daisy deeply. She thought back to her father, to all the things he hadn't known until it was too late. Perhaps knowledge wasn't just given, perhaps it had to be sought. The idea stirred something restless in Daisy. That evening, she sat at her desk, a mug of chamomile tea by her side, and opened her granddaughter's old laptop. She typed carefully, her fingers stiff but determined. "Fruits good for diabetics." A flood of articles, videos, and stories appeared, some confusing, some overwhelming. But one caught her eye, a story about a fruit she had never even heard of before. Its name looked unusual on the screen, almost like a word from another language. Jabuticaba. She whispered it aloud, stumbling over the syllables, yet the strangeness of it made her smile. The more she read, the more intrigued she became. This little fruit, dark and round like a grape, was said to grow in far-off places, clinging directly to the trunk of a tree. It looked like something from a fairy tale, almost magical in its simplicity. And yet, its benefits were anything but fantasy. The words on the screen described how it slowed glucose absorption, how its skin carried compounds that calmed blood sugar spikes. Daisy leaned back in her chair, heart quickening. Could it really be true? A fruit that looked like candy but worked like medicine? It felt almost like a secret doctors had kept hidden all these years. She mentioned it at her next appointment, half expecting her doctor to laugh. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "Jabuticaba isn't common here," he admitted, "but it does have promising effects. If you can find it, it certainly won't hurt you." Daisy blinked in surprise. There it was again, the quiet confirmation that such things existed, but only if you went looking for them. Why hadn't he told her sooner? She left the office with a mix of frustration and determination. If this was the way forward, she would dig for every secret she could. It took her weeks to track it down. Specialty markets, whispers from health-conscious neighbors, even a small shop 2 towns over that sold it in bottled juice form. The first time Daisy held the fruit in her hand, she felt a strange reverence. Its skin was smooth, dark, and glistening, almost like polished stone. She bit into it hesitantly, and the flavor burst across her tongue, sweet, tart, layered. She ate the skin as the articles had urged, and for the first time in months, she felt like she was not fighting against her diagnosis, but walking alongside it. That evening, Daisy told her family about the discovery over dinner. Her son raised an eyebrow at the name. Djibouti, what? He teased, but he listened as she explained. Her granddaughter wrinkled her nose and said, "It sounds like a dragon fruit," which made Daisy laugh. Yet when she offered them each a taste, they agreed it was unlike anything they'd had before. It wasn't just about eating the fruit, it was about sharing a piece of her hope, letting them see that she was still searching, still learning, still alive in her curiosity. The days that followed felt different. Daisy wasn't just eating to survive anymore, she was exploring. She blended jabuticaba into smoothies, tossed it into her morning yogurt, even tried a small recipe she found online for a jam without added sugar. Each experiment became an act of rebellion against the fear that had once silenced her appetite. And each time she ate it, she thought, "This is one of those secrets. This is what they don't tell us unless we ask." Her neighbor Marjorie noticed the change too. "You look brighter these days," she said one morning as they paused on their walk to catch their breath. Daisy smiled, a hint of pride shining through. "I found something new," she said simply, and though she didn't explain further, Marjorie nodded as if she already understood. Sometimes the discovery wasn't just about the fruit. It was about reclaiming the joy of searching, of realizing that life still had hidden treasures waiting. Daisy began to carry herself differently. The heaviness of her diagnosis no longer sat so firmly on her shoulders. She still had challenges, still faced moments of doubt, but now she also had a sense of agency. There was more to learn, more to discover, and she wasn't powerless in the process. That realization filled her with a quiet confidence she hadn't felt in years. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, Daisy reflected on the journey so far. First came the fear, then the relief of discovering apples and pears were still her allies. And now, the secret fruit from a faraway land, jabuticaba, had given her a new sense of possibility. She realized the world was bigger than her diagnosis, bigger than the limits she once believed. She whispered softly into the evening air, "There are secrets out there waiting for me." And in that moment, she felt not just like a diabetic woman managing her condition, but like a traveler on a path of discovery, uncovering truths the doctors never quite shared. For the first time in a long time, Daisy was not afraid of sweetness. She was learning to trust it again, one fruit at a time. Daisy had always believed that life's turning points came wrapped in drama. The hospital visits, the stern warnings, the unexpected diagnoses. But what she never imagined was that one of her quietest discoveries would come wrapped in the delicate skin of a tiny purple fruit. Jabuticaba sat in a simple white bowl on her counter, nothing grand about it at first glance. Yet when she reached for it, when she bit through its tart sweet skin, something inside her shifted. It wasn't just the taste, it was the realization that this little fruit held power she hadn't given herself permission to believe in before. The first time Daisy ate jabuticaba, she half expected her body to betray her. She anticipated the familiar rush of guilt, the subtle worry that her sugar levels would spiral, that she had overstepped. But instead, she noticed something new, a steadiness. After her meal, she didn't feel the foggy heaviness that often settled over her like an unwelcome guest. She felt calm, her energy flowing evenly, like a river without sudden bends. It was subtle, almost easy to miss, but Daisy had spent enough time listening to her body lately to know when something was different. She thought about it all afternoon as she watered her roses, the way her hands didn't tremble, the way her breath didn't feel shallow. Could such a small fruit truly carry such weight? She remembered her father again, how he had clung to bitter medicines, each one promising to steady him, yet leaving him exhausted. If he had known about this, would his days have been lighter? The thought brought both comfort and sadness, a reminder of how much knowledge had been hidden in plain sight. Later that week, Daisy decided to experiment. She cut the jabuticaba into halves and stirred them into her morning yogurt. The fruit bled its deep purple into the white, a swirl of color that looked almost too beautiful to eat. When her granddaughter walked in and saw it, she gasped. "Grandma, it looks like a galaxy." Daisy laughed, spooning a bite and savoring the way the flavor mingled with the creaminess. For a moment, breakfast didn't feel like a chore of safe foods. It felt like an indulgence, a small feast that honored her body instead of betraying it. Her neighbor Marjorie, ever curious, dropped by one afternoon when Daisy had just finished blending a smoothie. The deep, violet drink shimmered in the glass, rich and inviting. "What on earth is that?" Marjorie asked, wide-eyed. Daisy grinned, handing her a glass. "A fruit with more power than it lets on." They drank together on the porch, the warm breeze carrying the scent of blooming roses. Marjorie smacked her lips and nodded. Sweet, but not heavy. I like it. For Daisy, it wasn't just about sharing the fruit. It was about sharing a piece of hope, watching her friend sip the same secret she had uncovered. But not everyone understood. Her son raised an eyebrow when he found a bag of jabuticaba in the fridge. "Mom, you're always chasing something new," he teased, though his tone carried a hint of concern. Daisy met his eyes steadily. "Maybe, but this time I think I found something worth chasing." She didn't expect him to understand fully. After all, he hadn't felt the sting of fear that came with the doctor's diagnosis, the way every choice felt like a gamble. Still, she hoped he would one day see that this wasn't desperation. It was courage. The real test came quietly. A week into her experiment, Daisy noticed her evenings no longer ended with the same crushing fatigue. She still rested, of course. Age demanded it, but she no longer collapsed into her chair with the same weight pressing her chest. She had energy enough to fold laundry, to sit with her books, even to call her sister and chat without cutting the conversation short. These may have seemed like small things, but to Daisy, they were monumental. Each task felt like proof that her body was responding, that she wasn't powerless after all. One evening, she wrote in her notebook, something she had started doing since her diagnosis. She scribbled down the words, "Not all sweetness harms, some heals." She underlined it twice, letting the ink press deep into the page. She thought about how much fear had robbed her in those first few weeks, how every apple, every slice of fruit had felt like an enemy. Now here she was, learning that hidden within nature were small gifts she hadn't known to trust. She closed her notebook with a soft sigh, feeling gratitude ripple through her. Daisy began to imagine new possibilities. What if she planted her own jabuticaba tree? She read that it grew slowly, hugging its fruit to its trunk as though protecting it. The image filled her with warmth, a tree that bore sweetness close to its heart, waiting for someone patient enough to tend it. She wasn't sure if her soil could handle it, but the thought itself was enough to make her dream. Perhaps her garden, once only roses and herbs, could one day cradle this strange fruit that had quietly shifted her life. At her next doctor's visit, she mentioned how she'd been feeling. The physician looked at her with a curious smile. "Whatever you're doing, Daisy, keep it up. You seem brighter." She wanted to tell him everything about the fruit, the smoothies, the steady evenings, but instead she simply nodded. Not because she wanted to keep it secret, but because she knew the real story wasn't about the science. It was about the way her fear had turned into curiosity, and her curiosity had blossomed into hope. That night, sitting on her porch as the stars blinked awake, Daisy thought about how strange life was. That something so small, something she'd never even heard of months ago, could ripple through her days with such quiet power. She felt humbled, but also strong. She knew her journey was far from over. There would be other challenges, other fears to face. But tonight, with the taste of jabuticaba still lingering sweetly on her tongue, Daisy felt ready. Ready for whatever came next. Ready to keep searching for the hidden powers tucked inside the ordinary things of life. For Daisy, mornings had always been a fragile time. In the weeks after her diagnosis, she often woke with a dull heaviness pressing behind her eyes. Breakfast became a guessing game. What to eat, what to avoid, how to make it through the next few hours without crashing into that fog she dreaded. Yet now, sitting at her small kitchen table with a plate of sliced fruit before her, something felt different. She picked up a piece of jabuticaba and chewed thoughtfully. Just one bite, she thought, and her body didn't recoil in panic. Instead, it welcomed the sweetness with a strange calm, like a quiet wave smoothing out ripples in a restless pond. The first time she noticed the change, Daisy almost didn't believe it. After breakfast, she usually braced herself for the jittery swings, the restless need to lie down. But that morning, as sunlight poured through the window and the kettle whistled softly in the background, she realized she still felt steady. No sudden spikes of energy, no sudden crashes, just balance. She carried her teacup to the porch and sat among the roses, marveling at the gentleness of it all. "One bite," she murmured to herself, "and look at me now." That steadiness followed her into her day. On her walk with Marjorie, she noticed she wasn't clutching her arm as tightly when they climbed the small hill by the park. Her breath came easier, her steps didn't feel weighed down. Marjorie glanced at her and said, half teasing, "You're outpacing me today, Daisy." Daisy smiled but said nothing. She didn't want to jinx it, didn't want to speak aloud the fragile hope that was growing inside her. But in her heart, she knew something was working. It wasn't just the physical calm, it was the emotional relief that came with it. For weeks, Daisy had lived under the shadow of fear, afraid of every choice on her plate. Now, for the first time, she felt her body cooperating instead of resisting. It was like dancing with a partner who finally moved in rhythm with her, no longer pulling her off balance. That night, she pulled her journal close and wrote, "Today I felt peace after breakfast. Not fear, not regret. Peace." The words looked small on the page, but to Daisy, they carried the weight of a promise. Her son noticed too. Over dinner one evening, he studied her face as she laughed at her granddaughter's silly story. "Mom," he said slowly, "you seem lighter these days." Daisy met his gaze, her fork poised above her plate. "Maybe I am," she admitted. "Maybe my body is learning how to be calm again." He didn't ask for details, but his smile told her everything. It wasn't just her who felt the change. Her family was watching her come back to life, piece by piece. One afternoon, Daisy decided to test herself. She prepared a small salad with slices of pear and apple, a sprinkling of jabuticaba, and a handful of walnuts. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, then waited. Instead of the familiar cycle of dread, waiting for her sugar to spike, for her body to betray her, she felt an even flow of energy. She folded laundry, watered her roses, and even pulled out an old book she hadn't touched in months. By the time she set it aside, she realized hours had passed without the usual fatigue pressing her down. She exhaled, long and deep, as though releasing months of fear in one breath. But the calmness wasn't just inside her body, it began to color her world. Her mornings no longer felt rushed or dreaded, she welcomed them. She found herself humming as she tidied the kitchen, pausing to breathe in the scent of fresh fruit on the counter. Even her roses seemed brighter to her, their colors more vivid, their petals softer under her fingers. She realized then that balance wasn't only about numbers or charts, it was about living each moment without the constant fear of what might come next. Daisy shared her little victory with her sister during their weekly phone call. "It's the strangest thing," she said, her voice alive with wonder. "I don't feel the spikes anymore. I just feel steady." Her sister chuckled warmly. "Sounds like you found your rhythm again, Daisy. Hold on to it." Those words lingered long after the call ended, echoing in Daisy's heart. Rhythm. Yes, that's what it was, her life moving to a gentler beat, her body no longer stumbling between extremes. She even noticed her nights changing. Where once she tossed and turned, waking often with a dry throat and a restless mind, she now found herself sleeping longer, deeper. She dreamed again, soft, meandering dreams of gardens and family gatherings. Each morning she woke with a quiet smile, grateful for rest that felt whole. One evening, before climbing into bed, she stood by her mirror and whispered, "You're coming back to me, Daisy." The reflection that stared back wasn't perfect, but it was alive, hopeful, and strong. The truth was, it all began with a single bite. That first apple she had dared to eat, that first strange jabuticaba she had trusted. From there, her world had opened like a flower in bloom, each petal revealing another layer of sweetness she thought she had lost. And now, with each bite, her body was learning to stay calm, to trust, to live again. Daisy knew there would still be days of struggle, moments of doubt, but as she sat on her porch one golden afternoon, the taste of fruit lingering sweetly on her tongue, she understood something vital. Her journey wasn't about perfection, it was about balance. And balance, she realized, could start with something as small as one bite. Daisy had always been the kind of woman who peeled her fruit. Apples, pears, even peaches. She believed the flesh was where the sweetness lay, while the skin was something rough to be discarded. She remembered how her children, when they were small, would sit at the table watching as she neatly sliced away the skins, leaving only the soft fruit for their lunchboxes. It felt like care, like protection, removing what was unnecessary so they could enjoy what remained. But now, with every bite of fruit she took, she began to wonder if she had been discarding the very thing her body needed most. It was her doctor's voice, still echoing from her last appointment, that planted the thought. He had mentioned casually, almost in passing, "Don't peel the skin, Daisy. That's where so many of the good compounds are." At the time, she had nodded politely, but the words had lingered. Could the cure, or at least the comfort, be in the part she had always thrown away? The thought stayed with her one evening as she stood at the counter with a bright green apple in hand. She held the peeler for a long time, then set it down and raised the apple whole to her lips. The crunch was loud, startling almost, and the skin's slight bitterness mixed with the fruit's sweetness in a way that felt honest. It was not as soft, not as easily tamed, but it was real. As she chewed, she thought about life itself. How often we try to cut away the rough edges, the bitter moments, the things we don't want to taste. But perhaps, she realized, those very parts are what give us strength. The skin was tougher, yes, but it was also where resilience lived. By discarding it, she had been discarding something essential. That night, Daisy shared her discovery with her granddaughter. They were in the living room, Daisy slicing apples for a bedtime snack. "Do you want me to peel it?" she asked out of habit. Her granddaughter shook her head quickly. "No, Grandma, leave it on. That's the best part." Daisy blinked in surprise. "The best part?" The little girl nodded with certainty. "That's where the color is. And I think it makes you stronger." Daisy laughed softly, but inside she felt a swell of emotion. Out of the mouths of children, sometimes the simplest truths appeared. The next day, Daisy tried it with pears. She washed them carefully, the skin glistening under the faucet, and sliced them into wedges. Eating the fruit with its skin was a new experience, a bit chewier, a bit richer, but it filled her more deeply. She noticed she didn't crave another snack as quickly. The fruit lingered with her, grounding her body in a steady rhythm. She thought again of her journal entry. Not all sweetness harms, some heals. Now she added another line beneath it. The skin holds the secret. Her neighbor Marjorie wrinkled her nose when Daisy offered her an unpeeled slice one morning. "I've never liked the skin," Marjorie admitted, biting hesitantly, but after a moment she shrugged. "It's not so bad, and if it's good for me, maybe I'll learn to like it." Daisy smiled, realizing how much her own shift was influencing those around her. She wasn't just changing her habits, she was gently nudging her circle of friends and family to rethink their own. The symbolism wasn't lost on Daisy. She remembered the years she had spent hiding her own rough edges after her husband's passing. She had tried to present only the softer parts of herself, the smile, the politeness, the willingness to help others. But beneath that, there had always been grief, resilience, and strength, the skin of her own life that she had been too quick to hide. Now, as she chewed thoughtfully on the skin of a pear, she felt as though she was honoring those rougher parts of herself too. She wasn't discarding them anymore. One evening, her son joined her for dinner. He noticed the apple slices on the table, their bright skins shining in the lamplight. "You never used to eat the skin," he said curiously. Daisy looked at him, her eyes soft. "I used to think it was just waste. But now I see, sometimes the best things are where you least expect them." He nodded slowly, perhaps not fully grasping the depth of her words, but sensing their weight. For Daisy, it wasn't just about nutrition. It was about the lesson life kept teaching her. Don't throw away what feels rough because it may hold what heals you most. Daisy began to notice the difference in her energy again. Eating fruit whole, skin and all, seemed to keep her satisfied longer, her body calmer. She no longer prowled the kitchen mid-afternoon searching for something else. She no longer felt that jittery dip between meals. Instead, she felt anchored. It was a quiet change, but to her it was monumental. She thought about the generations before her, about her father who had peeled his apples carefully, never knowing what he was losing. She wished she could go back and tell him, could place a whole apple in his hand and whisper, "Don't peel it, trust it as it is." But since she couldn't, she chose instead to honor him by changing herself. And maybe, just maybe, by teaching her children and grandchildren not to throw away the skins of their own lives. That night, Daisy closed her notebook again, the pen resting softly in her hand. She had written another line. The cure is not in removing, but in embracing. She sat quietly with the words, letting them sink deep into her heart. For the first time, she felt at peace not only with her diagnosis, but with the truth that healing often comes from the parts we once overlooked. And as she washed another pear for the next day, she smiled. The skin glistened in the light, no longer something to be discarded, but something to be cherished. Daisy knew then that she was learning not just how to live with diabetes, but how to live more fully, rough edges and all. Daisy had always thought of snacks as something quick, something grabbed without much thought, a handful of crackers, a slice of bread, sometimes even a cookie or two when the afternoon felt long and heavy. But since her diagnosis, snacking had become one of her greatest fears. Those little bites that once carried comfort now seemed like traps, threatening to send her sugar spiraling. For weeks, she avoided snacks altogether, sitting with her hunger like a punishment. Yet the longer she went, the more she realized avoiding wasn't the answer. She needed to learn how to snack differently, not as an enemy, but as a shield. The revelation came one afternoon when her granddaughter was visiting. Daisy had sliced an apple, skin on, and placed it on the table. Her granddaughter, without hesitation, reached into her backpack and pulled out a small container of peanut butter. She dipped a slice into it and grinned. "Try it, Grandma," she said between bites. Daisy hesitated. The thought of mixing sweet with something rich and savory seemed odd, but she watched the child's delight and thought, why not? She took a slice, spread it lightly, and bit. The combination surprised her. The crunch of apple, the creaminess of peanut butter, the way it filled her so completely. It wasn't just a snack, it felt like something stronger, more lasting. That day became a turning point. Daisy noticed that after eating the apple with peanut butter, she didn't feel the same restless dip in energy. There was no sudden urge to reach for something else, no shadow of guilt hovering over her. Instead, she felt steady, as though the snack itself had built a small shield around her body, guarding her from the spikes she feared so much. She thought about it long into the evening, the memory of the flavor mingling with the memory of calmness. Could it really be that simple? That combining the right foods could transform a snack from danger into defense? The next morning, she decided to test it again. She took a pear, sliced it carefully, and paired it with a spoonful of unsweetened Greek yogurt. The tart creaminess mingled with the sweetness in a way that felt indulgent yet safe. Hours later, when she usually would have felt drained, Daisy found herself still moving with energy, folding laundry and humming softly to herself. She wrote in her notebook, "Snacks don't have to harm, with the right pairing, they protect." Her neighbor Marjorie noticed the change too. On one of their walks, Daisy packed a small container of blackberries mixed with a handful of almonds. She offered some to Marjorie, who raised an eyebrow. "This looks fancy," she teased, but after a few bites, she admitted it was delicious. Daisy explained softly, "It keeps me from spiking. I think of it like armor." Marjorie nodded thoughtfully, and Daisy felt a quiet pride. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was passing along small pieces of wisdom to those she cared for. Her son was harder to convince. One evening when he stopped by, Daisy placed a small plate of kiwi slices beside a dish of cottage cheese. "Try it," she urged. He looked at her skeptically. "Kiwi and cheese? That's strange, Mom." But he humored her, and after a bite, his eyebrows lifted. "Actually, this works." Daisy laughed, the sound light and full. It wasn't about impressing him with flavor, it was about showing him that she was learning to live fully again, even within her limits. What Daisy loved most was how these pairings made her feel. She wasn't nibbling out of fear anymore. She wasn't punishing herself with blandness. Each snack became an act of care, a way of saying to her body, "I see you, I'm listening, I'll protect you." The simple ritual of preparing a plate, slicing the fruit, spooning the yogurt, arranging the nuts, became something tender, almost meditative. She found herself slowing down, appreciating the colors, the textures, the promise of balance that each bite held. One afternoon while journaling, Daisy remembered her father again. She thought of the way he used to eat in silence, meals heavy with starches that left him sluggish. She wished she could go back and tell him, "It's not about denying yourself, it's about combining, finding harmony." But since she couldn't, she chose to honor him by living that truth herself. Every pairing became a quiet prayer for the years he had lost, and a promise to herself that she would not repeat the same mistakes. Her confidence grew. No longer did she dread the hours between meals. Instead, she looked forward to them, knowing she had tools to keep herself steady. She kept small containers of almonds in her handbag, yogurt cups in her fridge, and apples always on the counter. Her pantry no longer felt like a battleground, but a place of possibility. For Daisy, this was no small victory. It was freedom. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daisy sat on her porch with a plate of fruit and nuts by her side. She bit into a blackberry, its juice rich and tangy, and followed it with a crisp almond. The combination was simple, but the feeling it gave her was profound. She didn't feel like a woman deprived, a patient chained to restrictions. She felt like someone discovering new joys, small but powerful. She whispered softly to herself, "This is my shield." And as she finished her snack, Daisy realized that her journey wasn't just about avoiding harm anymore. It was about building strength, bite by bite, pairing by pairing. The woman who once feared every snack had found a new way to see them, not as threats, but as allies. And in that shift, she felt herself growing not only healthier, but freer. For most of her life, Daisy never gave much thought to apples. They were always there, stacked neatly in the grocery store, tucked into school lunches, waiting in the fruit bowl at home. She had eaten them in pies during the holidays, sliced them for her children's after-school snacks, even pressed them into juice for picnics. Apples were ordinary, dependable, and almost invisible in their familiarity. But now, sitting at her kitchen table with a crisp green apple before her, Daisy realized how much she had underestimated this common fruit. It had begun innocently enough. Her son had mentioned weeks ago that apples were safe, but Daisy had been too overwhelmed then to believe him. She was still living under the weight of fear, convinced that sweetness in any form meant danger. But after her journey with Jabuticaba, after learning about skins and shields, she decided to give the apple a closer look. She rinsed it carefully, set it on the cutting board, and paused. The fruit was simple, yes, but something in her heart whispered, "Don't dismiss what looks ordinary." When she bit into it, the crunch echoed through her quiet kitchen. The tartness of the green flesh mingled with just enough sweetness to make her lips curve into a smile. She chewed slowly, waiting for the guilt to follow, waiting for her body to rebel. But instead, the same calmness spread through her, that gentle steadiness she was learning to trust. She took another bite, then another, until half the apple was gone. It wasn't exotic or rare, not like Jabuticaba. It wasn't glamorous. But in its simplicity, it surprised her. The apple was exactly what she needed, familiar, comforting, and quietly powerful. The realization struck her later that afternoon as she carried a second apple in her handbag to the library. She was meeting her granddaughter for a reading session, something they had started doing once a week. While the little girl pored over picture books, Daisy reached into her bag and pulled out the apple. She took a bite, and the sound drew her granddaughter's attention. "Grandma, you eat apples now?" she asked curiously. Daisy nodded with a smile. "Yes, darling, they're my little helpers." The child giggled, then went back to her book, but Daisy felt a warmth in her chest. Sharing such a simple snack in such a simple moment made her feel normal again, something she hadn't felt since her diagnosis. Her neighbor Marjorie noticed too. One morning, Daisy brought apples to their walk, offering one as they rested on a park bench. Marjorie bit into hers and sighed happily. "I forgot how good these are," she admitted. Daisy chuckled. "So did I. Sometimes we overlook what's right in front of us." They sat together in comfortable silence, the crunch of apples punctuating the birdsong. For Daisy, it was more than a snack. It was a reminder that healing didn't always come from the extraordinary. Sometimes it came from the humble, the everyday, the things we pass by without seeing. Her doctor confirmed what Daisy was beginning to feel. At her checkup, she mentioned how she had started eating apples regularly. He nodded approvingly. "They're rich in pectin, which slows down sugar absorption. That's why you feel steady afterward." Daisy smiled softly, grateful for the science, but even more grateful for the lived experience. It wasn't just about numbers on a chart, it was about waking up with energy, walking without heaviness, reading with her granddaughter without fatigue tugging at her eyelids. The apple had surprised her not only in its effect, but in the way it restored pieces of her life she thought she'd lost. One evening, Daisy decided to bake. She sliced apples thinly, sprinkled them with a little cinnamon, and placed them in the oven. The warm scent filled her small kitchen, reminding her of autumn days long ago when her children would run in from school and beg for pie. When the slices were ready, she pulled them out, golden and fragrant. She ate slowly, savoring the sweetness without fear. For the first time, dessert didn't feel like a crime. It felt like comfort, like home. She whispered to herself, "Who would have thought the answer was right here all along?" The more she ate apples, the more she realized how versatile they were. Raw with peanut butter, baked with cinnamon, sliced into salads, or carried whole in her handbag. Each way brought its own joy, and each way reminded her that she wasn't deprived. She wasn't doomed to a life of blandness. She still had choices, delicious, nourishing ones that didn't betray her. The apple, in all its simplicity, had become a quiet symbol of freedom. Her sister, during one of their long phone calls, listened to Daisy's enthusiasm and laughed. "You sound like you're rediscovering the world, one bite at a time." Daisy grinned. "Maybe I am. And you know what's funny? The biggest surprises aren't the strange or exotic things. Sometimes it's the ones that have been here all along, waiting for us to see them differently." That night, as Daisy washed another apple and set it on her counter, she paused to admire it. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't rare, but it was hers, safe, steady, and faithful. And in that moment, she felt a deep gratitude for the ordinary, because sometimes the ordinary turned out to be extraordinary after all. Daisy stood at her kitchen counter one quiet morning, a red apple resting in her palm. Its skin shone under the light, tiny speckles catching her eye. For decades, her instinct would have been the same: reach for the peeler. She'd always believed the skin was something to be stripped away, too tough, too bitter, too full of things she didn't want. But lately, she had been learning that the very part she once discarded was, in truth, the treasure. She set down the peeler, smiled softly to herself, and took a bite, skin and all. The crunch filled the room, and with it came a surge of realization. Life, she thought, had a way of teaching us through the smallest things. How many times had she tried to smooth over the rough edges of her own story, presenting only the polished sweetness? And yet, it was the edges, the struggles, the grief, the perseverance that had given her strength. Just as the skin held the apple's richest nutrients, her scars held her deepest resilience. By eating fruit whole, she wasn't just nourishing her body, she was honoring every part of herself. Her granddaughter noticed first. One afternoon, Daisy sliced apples for their reading session. This time, she didn't peel them. The little girl's eyes widened. "Grandma, you never leave the skin on," Daisy chuckled. "I've learned it's the best part." The child chewed thoughtfully, then nodded. "It makes it prettier too." Daisy smiled at the simplicity of it. To her granddaughter, the skin was about color. To Daisy, it was about courage. And together, it became a shared discovery that sometimes what we overlook is what makes life whole. Marjorie, her walking companion, was harder to convince. One morning, Daisy offered her a slice of pear, skin intact. Marjorie wrinkled her nose. "It's chewy," Daisy laughed, pressing another slice into her hand. "Chewy means strong. Try it again." With a reluctant bite, Marjorie chewed slowly, then raised an eyebrow. "You might be onto something." Daisy grinned, feeling the quiet satisfaction of planting another seed of change in her friend's life. The difference in Daisy's own body became clearer each week. With the skins, she felt fuller longer, steadier between meals. The old habit of prowling through the kitchen mid-afternoon faded away. Instead, she found herself more present, reading longer without fatigue, tending her roses without distraction, even napping less. The skins, she realized, weren't just adding nutrition, they were teaching her patience, teaching her to appreciate the whole instead of picking apart the parts. Her son teased her about it one evening when he dropped by. "Next thing you'll tell me is potato skins are the secret to life," he joked, eyeing the unpeeled apples on the counter. Daisy laughed. "Maybe they are. The things we throw away are often the things that matter most." He smiled, shaking his head, but she saw the spark of thought in his eyes. For Daisy, it wasn't about winning him over. It was about showing him, little by little, that resilience could be found in unexpected places. There was a deeper meaning, too, one Daisy often wrote about in her notebook. She thought about her late husband, about the years she had spent softening her grief so others wouldn't see. She had peeled away her sorrow, tried to hide the roughness, presenting only the sweeter parts of herself. But the truth was, her grief had shaped her, had strengthened her in ways no one could see. By embracing fruit skins now, she was embracing those rougher truths as well. She no longer wanted to peel away the harder parts of life. She wanted to carry them, taste them, let them feed her strength. One evening, Daisy prepared a small dessert for herself. Baked pears with cinnamon, skins still intact. As the sweet fragrance filled the air, she thought about her father again. He had peeled every fruit, believing it was cleaner, safer, better that way. She wished she could hand him a slice now, still wearing its skin, and whisper, "Don't throw away what holds the cure." Since she couldn't, she honored him by savoring every bite, skin and all, her heart full of both memory and healing. Her sleep improved too. Daisy noticed that on nights she had eaten fruit whole, she drifted off more easily, her body less restless. It was as though the fullness carried her gently into rest, anchoring her in a rhythm she had once lost. One morning, she woke and caught her reflection in the mirror. Her cheeks carried a faint flush, her eyes brighter. She touched her face gently and whispered, "You're coming back." The act of eating fruit whole became more than habit. It became ritual. Each morning, Daisy chose an apple or pear, washed it carefully, and ate its skin on as a promise to herself. A promise not to throw away what was valuable, not to dismiss what seemed rough, not to overlook the strength hidden in plain sight. Each bite was grounding, reminding her that healing was not about stripping away, but about embracing. That afternoon, as she sat on the porch with her journal, Daisy wrote, "Wholeness comes when we stop discarding parts of ourselves." She underlined it twice, letting the words settle deep into her heart. She realized then that her journey with fruit was also her journey with life. She wasn't just learning to eat differently, she was learning to live differently, wholly, fully, without fear. And as the sun dipped low, Daisy finished her apple, the last bite of skin sweet and crisp. She smiled, not just because her body felt calm, but because her soul felt seen. She had stopped throwing away the best parts of the fruit, of her story, of herself. It was the season when the local market brimmed with color. Tables lined with peaches, baskets of plums, and mounds of cherries filled the air with fragrance. Daisy wandered through the stalls, her canvas bag swinging gently at her side. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, only enjoying the bustle, the laughter of children running between aisles, and the hum of vendors calling out their offers. Then she saw them, a tray of glossy blackberries, deep purple and almost shimmering in the sunlight. Something about them caught her attention, small, unassuming, yet bold in their color, as if whispering, "Don't overlook us." She picked up a small carton, the berries plump and cool beneath her fingers. For a moment she hesitated. She had always loved berries, but since her diagnosis she avoided them, worried about their sweetness. But something in her heart nudged her. She remembered her own lesson. Not everything sweet is an enemy. Maybe, just maybe, these tiny berries carried more than flavor. Daisy paid the vendor, tucked the carton into her bag, and carried them home with quiet anticipation. That afternoon, she poured the blackberries into a bowl, their juice already staining her fingertips as she washed them. She sat at her kitchen table, staring for a moment before lifting one to her lips. The first bite surprised her, tart, sweet, almost earthy, a taste that lingered longer than she expected. She chewed slowly, letting herself notice the way it filled her, not with fear, but with a grounded steadiness. She ate another and another until the bowl was nearly half empty. Then she waited. She braced herself for the old feeling of fog creeping in, of energy dropping away. But it didn't come. Instead, she felt light, protected. The next day, she tested again. This time she paired the berries with a spoonful of plain yogurt, swirling the purple juice into the white cream. The combination was delightful, a breakfast that felt almost indulgent. Hours later, as she tended to her roses, Daisy realized she still had energy. Her knees didn't ache as much, her steps felt lighter. She whispered to herself, "Tiny berries, giant protection." It felt true. These small fruits were shielding her, quietly, from the swings she once dreaded. Marjorie noticed the change during their morning walk. Daisy carried a small container of blackberries, offering a few as they rested on the bench by the park. Marjorie popped one into her mouth and raised her eyebrows. "Tart little things," she said. Daisy grinned. "Tart, yes, but they hold more strength than they show." Marjorie nodded thoughtfully, and Daisy felt a swell of pride. Once again, she wasn't just feeding herself, she was sharing hope. Her son's reaction came later. He opened the fridge to find several cartons of berries lined neatly on the shelf. "Mom, you've turned into a blackberry farmer," he joked. Daisy laughed, but her tone was steady. "If I could plant them in the yard, I would." He studied her face for a moment, then softened. "You really feel better with them, don't you?" She nodded. "They keep me steady." And in his eyes, she saw understanding, not just for the fruit, but for the way his mother was reclaiming her life, berry by berry. Daisy began experimenting. She tossed blackberries into salads, their burst of flavor mingling with greens and walnuts. She froze them for smoothies, blending them with kiwi for a refreshing drink. She even stirred them into oatmeal, watching the purple hue spread across the bowl like watercolor paint. Each time, the result was the same: sweetness without fear, energy without the crash. She no longer felt trapped by her diagnosis. Instead, she felt protected, as though these tiny berries had taken up arms on her behalf. Her notebook filled with new reflections. One evening she wrote, "Strength doesn't always look large. Sometimes it hides in the smallest things." She thought about her own life, the small decisions, the daily choices, the seemingly insignificant acts of care that had carried her through widowhood, through raising her children, through illness. Just like the berries, her strength had never been loud, but it had always been there, steady and protective. On Sunday afternoon, her granddaughter visited again. Daisy offered her a bowl of berries, watching her small hands pop them eagerly into her mouth. "They look like jewels," the child said, her lips stained purple. Daisy smiled, touched by the image. Jewels, yes, that was what they were. Treasures hidden in plain sight, waiting to be recognized. As her granddaughter giggled at the color on her tongue, Daisy felt her heart swell with gratitude. These tiny berries weren't just food, they were memory-making, life-giving companions. The real surprise came in her sleep. For years, Daisy had struggled with restless nights, waking often with a dry throat or a racing mind. But after a week of eating blackberries regularly, she noticed something new. Her nights stretched longer, her sleep deeper. She woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in months, her body refreshed instead of drained. She looked in the mirror one morning and thought, "You look brighter, Daisy." And indeed, she did. One evening, as the sun set over her porch, Daisy sat with her journal and a small bowl of berries. She ate slowly, savoring each burst of flavor, and wrote, "Protection can come from the smallest things. Never overlook them." She underlined it, letting the ink press deep into the paper. Then she leaned back, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink, her heart quiet, her body steady. Daisy realized then that her journey wasn't about seeking miracles in distant places. It was about noticing the gifts that had always been around her, simple, humble, and quietly powerful. Like blackberries, small but mighty, her life was made stronger by the little things. And in that truth, she found peace. Daisy sat on the porch one warm afternoon, a bowl of fruit resting in her lap. The air smelled faintly of cut grass, and children's laughter drifted from a nearby yard. She looked down at the blackberries and apple slices before her, their colors vivid in the fading light. For so long, sweetness had been tangled with guilt. A single bite of cake, a spoonful of jam, each carried whispers of danger, of hidden consequences she couldn't see until her body reminded her. But now, as she lifted a blackberry to her lips, Daisy realized something had changed. Sweetness no longer felt like a betrayal. It felt like a gift, one offered by nature itself, safe and steady, waiting for her to accept it. Her journey had taught her that not all cravings were traps. She had feared them once, treating every desire for something sweet as though it were a flaw, a weakness to be punished. But now she understood, her body was not her enemy. Cravings could be a signal, a way of asking for nourishment, for balance. The trick, she realized, was in choosing the right sweetness, the kind that carried her gently instead of pulling her down. Nature, in its quiet wisdom, had given her those options. Apples, pears, blackberries, all of them little reminders that safety and sweetness could live side by side. Her granddaughter wandered onto the porch then, a book tucked under her arm. "Grandma, can I have one?" she asked, pointing at the bowl. Daisy handed her a slice of apple, smiling as the child bit into it with delight. Watching her granddaughter's carefree joy, Daisy felt her chest loosen. This was what she had been afraid of losing, the simple, unburdened pleasure of sharing food with her family. But here they were, enjoying fruit together, laughter mixing with crunches and giggles. It wasn't fear anymore, it was connection. Later that evening, Daisy tried something new. She had found a recipe in one of her old cookbooks, baked apples stuffed with walnuts and a sprinkle of cinnamon. She adjusted it, leaving out the sugar the recipe insisted on, trusting the fruit's own sweetness to shine through. As the aroma filled her kitchen, she felt a wave of anticipation. When she took her first bite, the warmth of the apple mixed with the spice, filling her with a comfort that reached deep into her bones. She closed her eyes, savoring it, and whispered, "Sweet but safe." It was nature's trick, she thought, giving her sweetness that loved her back. Marjorie came by the next morning, and Daisy offered her one of the leftover baked apples. Marjorie raised her eyebrows. "No sugar? You're braver than me." Daisy grinned and shook her head. "Not brave, just learning to trust nature more than the packet." They ate together at the kitchen table, the silence filled with the sound of spoons scraping gently against plates. When Marjorie finally looked up, her face softened. "You're right, it doesn't need anything more. It's perfect like this." Daisy felt a swell of satisfaction, not only because she had found a safe way to indulge, but because she could share it, proving to herself that sweetness didn't need to come with regret. Her son noticed the difference too. He stopped by one afternoon and found her in the kitchen, stirring blackberries into a bowl of yogurt. "Mom, you're eating sweets again?" he asked cautiously. Daisy looked up, her eyes steady. "Yes, but the kind that heal instead of harm." He leaned against the counter, studying her face, then nodded. "You look happier." stronger even. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything Daisy had been working toward. She no longer looked like someone deprived, fearful, or fragile. She looked like a woman who had reclaimed joy. In her journal that night, Daisy wrote, "Sweetness is not the enemy, the wrong kind is. Nature holds the trick." She stared at the words for a long time, thinking about all the years she had spent punishing herself for wanting what was natural. She had denied, resisted, and cut herself off from small joys, believing that was strength. But now she knew real strength wasn't in denial, it was in discernment, choosing the sweetness that steadied her, that honored her body instead of wounding it. The lesson echoed through her days in subtle ways. When she craved something sweet in the afternoon, she didn't panic. She reached for an apple, or a handful of berries, or even a slice of kiwi, its bright green flesh reminding her of spring. And each time she felt her body respond not with chaos, but with calm. She felt her mind soften too, less anxious, less weighed down. She no longer feared her cravings. She trusted them because she had learned how to listen and how to answer wisely. One evening, as she sat with her sister on the phone, Daisy described it. "It feels like nature's trick," she said with a quiet laugh. "For years, I thought sweetness was the enemy, but now I see it was never sweetness itself. It was just the wrong kind. Nature has its own way of giving us what we need if we're willing to notice." Her sister was silent for a moment, then replied softly, "Sounds like you've found peace, Daisy." Daisy's eyes filled with tears because she knew it was true. That night, before bed, Daisy stood at her window, looking out at the darkened garden. The roses swayed gently in the night air, their fragrance faint but comforting. She thought about how life had once felt like a battlefield, every choice a danger, every craving a threat. And now, because of a few simple fruits, it felt different. Not perfect, not cured, but steadier, kinder, more livable. She whispered into the night, sweet but safe, and let the words settle into her heart. For Daisy, it wasn't about the fruit alone, it was about what the fruit represented, the return of trust, of joy, of connection to her own body. Nature had shown her its trick, and in learning it, she had found something priceless, a life where sweetness could exist without fear. The first time Daisy held a kiwi in her hand, she almost laughed. The small brown oval looked more like something plucked from the forest floor than a fruit meant for eating. Its fuzzy skin felt strange against her palm, and she remembered avoiding them in the past, dismissing them as too exotic, too odd. But as her journey unfolded, she had learned not to judge by appearances. She rinsed the kiwi carefully, sliced it open, and paused. The bright green flesh shimmered with tiny black seeds like a starry night sky hidden inside. It felt like a secret revealed only to those willing to look deeper. She lifted a slice to her lips and bit. The flavor burst across her tongue, tart, sweet, refreshing, with a brightness that made her eyes widen. It was unlike any fruit she had eaten before. She chewed slowly, feeling the texture, the juiciness, the tang that woke her senses. Something about the taste felt alive, like it carried energy straight into her veins. She set the slice down, her heart quickening. Could this be another one of nature's teachers? Something small yet powerful, waiting to show her what balance could mean? Over the next few days, Daisy began including kiwi in her mornings. She sliced it into her yogurt, stirred it into smoothies, even ate it plain with a spoon, scooping out the vibrant flesh. What surprised her most was not just the flavor, but the effect. After breakfast, she noticed her energy didn't rise and fall in sharp peaks. Instead, it stretched steady through the hours, a gentle flow that carried her without the usual dips. It was as if her body had found a rhythm it had been craving all along. One morning, while sitting on the porch with her journal, Daisy wrote, "Balance feels like breathing without strain. Kiwi teaches me this." She underlined the words, then glanced out at her roses, their stems swaying evenly in the breeze. That was how she felt, swaying, yes, but never breaking. Steady, balanced, alive. Her granddaughter, always curious, wrinkled her nose the first time Daisy offered her a slice. "It looks funny," she said. Daisy chuckled. "Funny sometimes means wonderful." The child took a hesitant bite, then grinned. "It tastes like candy." Daisy laughed with her, touched by the innocence. For Daisy, the kiwi wasn't candy. It was a quiet teacher, reminding her that balance didn't have to be bland. It could be bright, even joyful. Marjorie, on the other hand, was skeptical when Daisy brought kiwi slices to their walk. "Too sour for me," she said with a frown. Daisy smiled and replied gently, "Sometimes sour is what steadies you." She didn't press further. She had learned that not everyone was ready to listen. But for Daisy, kiwi had already earned its place at her table. Her doctor noticed the difference at her next appointment. Looking over her numbers, he nodded. "Your levels are more stable now, Daisy. Whatever you're doing, it's working." She smiled softly, thinking of the fuzzy brown fruit waiting on her counter. She wanted to explain, to tell him how balance wasn't just about numbers, but about mornings spent steady instead of fogged, about afternoons full of energy instead of exhaustion. But instead, she simply said, "I'm learning to listen." And in her heart, she knew that was the truest thing she could say. One evening, Daisy decided to try eating the kiwi with the skin on, something she had read about but never dared. She washed it carefully, sliced it thin, and tasted. The texture was strange, but not unbearable. The skin added depth, an earthiness that grounded the fruit's brightness. She thought about her own life, how balance had come not from sweetness alone, but from embracing the rougher parts too. Just like the kiwi's skin, her struggles gave her story weight, anchoring the brightness so it wouldn't float away. Her nights began to change again. Daisy noticed she fell asleep more easily, her mind less restless. The steadiness of her days seemed to carry her into evenings of peace. One morning, she woke with a clarity so sharp it startled her. She sat up in bed, touched her chest, and whispered, "Thank you." She wasn't sure if she was thanking the fruit, her body, or life itself, perhaps all three. Daisy began to share kiwi with her family more often. Her son raised an eyebrow at the fuzzy skins on her counter. "You're full of surprises these days," he teased. Daisy smiled. "No, life is. I'm just finally paying attention." Her granddaughter asked if they could plant a kiwi vine in the backyard. Daisy promised they'd try in the spring, already picturing the vines stretching upward, teaching balance in their own quiet way. In her journal, Daisy wrote another line. "Balance is not about removing ups and downs. It's about softening them, making life livable." She underlined it twice, then closed the notebook with a sense of calm. She realized that her diagnosis, once a storm, had brought her here, to lessons she never would have sought otherwise. And for that, strange as it was, she felt gratitude. That evening, Daisy sat on her porch, a kiwi sliced neatly on a plate beside her. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and green, almost mirroring the fruit in her hand. She took a bite, savoring its brightness, and felt her body settle into its rhythm once more. Sweet, tart, vibrant, steady, balance, taught not in lectures or charts, but in the simple gift of a small, fuzzy fruit. Daisy had always believed that beauty was found in the obvious: a shiny apple, a polished pear, a bowl of plump berries. Those were the fruits that drew her eye. The kiwi, though, with its fuzzy brown skin and odd little shape, it had never been her first choice. Even now, with her new openness to discovery, she hesitated each time she held one. She would slice it clean, scooping out the emerald flesh with a spoon, leaving the skin discarded on the plate. Yet something inside her whispered that she was still missing part of the lesson. One evening, she sat at her kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. A kiwi lay before her, its skin rough beneath her fingertips. She thought about how life often hides its best gifts in places that seem uninviting. She remembered her husband's passing years ago, how grief had felt like nothing but pain at first. Yet over time, within that roughness, she had found resilience, compassion, and a deeper strength she never knew she had. What if the kiwi was no different? What if its fuzzy skin, the part she kept discarding, held a miracle waiting to be embraced? The next morning, Daisy washed a kiwi carefully, sliced it thin with the skin still on, and took a cautious bite. The texture startled her, a mix of fuzz and tang, but the flavor surprised her even more. The skin grounded the sweetness, adding depth, almost like earth and sunshine meeting in her mouth. She chewed slowly, her face breaking into a smile. It wasn't what she expected, but it was good, more than good. It felt complete, as though the fruit had been waiting all along for her to eat it whole. Her granddaughter wandered into the kitchen just then, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Grandma, you're eating the skin?" she asked in disbelief. Daisy laughed. "Yes, darling. Sometimes the best parts are the ones we usually throw away." The child tilted her head thoughtfully, then reached for a slice. She chewed, made a funny face at the fuzz, and then grinned. "It's not bad. Kind of strong." Daisy hugged her tightly, her heart full. "Strong is good," she whispered. "Strong is exactly what we need." Later that week, Daisy shared the discovery with Marjorie during their walk. She offered her a slice from a small container she carried. Marjorie hesitated, examining the skin. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Daisy nodded, her eyes twinkling. "I am. Sometimes life hides miracles in the roughest places." Marjorie sighed, then bit into it. After chewing for a moment, she shrugged. "You know, it's not bad. You're teaching me things I never thought I'd try." Daisy smiled, realizing how her own courage was gently pulling others into new ways of seeing the world. What touched Daisy most, though, was how eating the kiwi skin made her feel inside. She noticed that she stayed fuller longer, her cravings less insistent. She no longer prowled her pantry in the late afternoon, searching for something to fill the emptiness. The kiwi, skin and all, had a way of satisfying her body and calming her mind. Each slice became a reminder that wholeness was found not in discarding, but in embracing. That evening, Daisy wrote in her notebook, "The miracle is not in the sweetness alone, but in what we once rejected." She underlined the words and thought about her life again. How many times had she doubted herself, set aside parts of her story she thought were too rough, too strange, too unworthy? And yet those very parts had carried her through, her grief, her struggles, her stubborn resilience. She realized then that the kiwi wasn't just teaching her about food, it was teaching her about herself. Her son raised an eyebrow when he saw her eating the fruit whole one afternoon. "You even eat the skin now? Mom, you never stop surprising me." Daisy chuckled. "I used to think the skin was waste, but it turns out it's where the strength is." He didn't argue, just smiled and shook his head. But Daisy could see the quiet pride in his eyes, the recognition that his mother, even at 68, was still learning, still growing, still brave enough to try new things. Nights became calmer too. The steady energy she found from kiwi carried her into restful sleep. She noticed her dreams felt softer, less restless, as though her body had found a gentle rhythm. One morning, she stood by her garden, watching the roses sway in the early breeze, and thought about all the hidden miracles that life tucks away. A fuzzy fruit, a rough patch of life, a loss that blooms into strength. All of them miracles disguised as something unwanted. That afternoon, Daisy shared her reflections with her sister over the phone. "It's strange," she said softly, "how a fuzzy little fruit can teach you about life. I used to peel away what I didn't like, thinking it made things better. But now I see sometimes the roughest parts hold the healing." Her sister was quiet for a moment, then replied gently, "Sounds like you found wisdom in the fuzz." Daisy laughed, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Yes," she said, "wisdom in the fuzz." That evening, she ate another kiwi, skin and all, as the sun sank behind the trees. Each bite felt like an act of courage, a small miracle in her daily life. She no longer looked at the fruit and saw something odd or unappealing. She saw strength, hidden where most people would never look. And as she finished the last slice, she whispered, "A miracle inside," letting the words settle into her heart. There was a time when Daisy craved quick fixes. A chocolate bar hidden in the pantry, a cookie offered at church, a slice of cake at a birthday party. They had always given her an instant rush. For a few bright minutes, the world seemed lighter, her energy sharper. But soon after, she would feel the weight crash down, trembling hands, heavy eyes, a heart that beat just a little too fast. Those sudden spikes had become one of her greatest fears after the doctor's diagnosis, reminders that her body no longer played by the old rules. Yet now, with fruit woven gently into her life, Daisy was learning something new. Sweetness didn't have to rush. It could come slowly, steadily, like a kind friend instead of a thief in the night. One morning, she sliced a pear, its pale flesh glistening, and ate it piece by piece as she watched the sunlight spread across her kitchen floor. Each bite felt unhurried, each swallow leaving her with a sense of calm rather than urgency. Hours later, she realized she hadn't felt the old crash. Instead, her body hummed with quiet energy, as though the fruit had released its gift gently, choosing to nourish instead of overwhelm. "Slowly, not suddenly," she whispered, writing the phrase in her notebook with a sense of awe. Her granddaughter noticed her new calmness too. During their reading session, Daisy no longer yawned halfway through or struggled to keep her eyes open. She turned the pages with steady hands, her voice even as she read aloud. The child looked up at her and smiled. "You're not tired anymore, Grandma." Daisy kissed the top of her head, her throat tightening with emotion. "That's because I found foods that are patient with me," she said softly. "They don't hurry me. They walk with me." Marjorie, ever curious, asked about it one morning as they rested on a park bench. Daisy explained how the fruits she ate now didn't send her sugar rushing up and down like a roller coaster, but instead gave her balance. Marjorie listened thoughtfully, then laughed. "Maybe that's what I need too, less roller coasters in my life." Daisy chuckled, realizing how true the words were. It wasn't only about blood sugar, it was about life itself. Quick highs and sudden lows wore a person down. Steadiness, though, that was where peace lived. Her son began to see it as well. One evening, he found Daisy in the kitchen preparing a small plate, slices of apple, a few blackberries, and a spoonful of yogurt. "You don't eat desserts anymore?" he asked. Daisy smiled, shaking her head. "These are my desserts now. They don't rush me, they don't punish me." He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "You look stronger, Mom, more grounded." Daisy felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't realized how much her steadiness was visible to others, how her quiet choices were painting a new picture of who she was becoming. The lesson of slowly, not suddenly, began to spill into other parts of her life. Daisy noticed it in her garden, how the roses never bloomed all at once but opened petal by petal, teaching her that beauty unfolded in time. She noticed it in her walks, how building stamina came from steady steps, not hurried ones. She noticed it in her grief, too, how healing had come not in sudden bursts, but in small, quiet moments over the years. Just like the fruit she ate, life's sweetest gifts often arrived gradually, if only she had the patience to wait. One evening, Daisy baked slices of pear with cinnamon and shared them with her sister over the phone. "It's the strangest thing," she told her. "I don't feel that rush anymore. It's like my body and I are moving at the same pace now." Her sister chuckled warmly. "Maybe that's what peace feels like. Not rushing, not lagging, just steady." Daisy nodded, holding the phone close as tears filled her eyes. Peace. Yes, that was the word she had been searching for. The more Daisy lived this way, the more she trusted her body again. She no longer felt like she was waiting for the next crash, the next betrayal. Instead, she trusted that with the right choices, her body would respond gently, faithfully. She began carrying fruit wherever she went, not out of fear, but out of trust, that her needs would be met without drama, without chaos. The apple in her bag was no longer a symbol of restriction, but of freedom. In her journal that week, Daisy wrote, "Not everything good has to come fast. Some things come slowly, and that's what makes them last." She underlined it twice, feeling the truth settle into her bones. She thought again of her father, how his life had been full of abrupt highs and lows, how his body had worn itself out on that roller coaster. She wished he could have known this lesson, that sweetness didn't have to harm if only he had chosen the slow kind. But since he couldn't, she carried the wisdom for him, for herself, and for the family who watched her example unfold. One afternoon, Daisy sat on her porch, a pear in her hand, and watched the clouds drift lazily across the sky. They didn't rush, didn't force themselves into shapes. They floated slowly, gracefully, in their own time. She bit into the pear, savoring its sweetness, and thought about how much her life had changed. She no longer feared food. She no longer feared her body. She was learning that slowness itself was a form of protection, a form of love. And as the evening light softened, Daisy whispered to herself, slowly, not suddenly, letting the words settle deep into her heart. It wasn't just about sugar. It was about life. And in that realization, she felt balance in a way she had never known before. For much of her life, Daisy had overlooked pears. She would buy them occasionally, letting them ripen in the fruit bowl until they softened too much and ended up in a pie or tossed away. To her, pears were always second to apples, less crisp, less exciting, less noticed. But one autumn afternoon, as she walked through the market, she saw a pile of golden pears glistening in the sunlight. Something about their simplicity caught her. She picked one up, its skin cool and smooth beneath her palm, and whispered to herself, "Maybe the quiet ones have the most to say." Back home, she sliced the pear into wedges, leaving the skin on. The first bite was soft, juicy, and subtly sweet. Unlike the bold tartness of apples or the sharp brightness of kiwi, the pear offered something gentler. Its sweetness didn't shout, it lingered. Daisy chewed thoughtfully, noticing how it filled her not with sudden energy, but with a quiet calm that lasted. By the time she set down her fork, she realized her hunger had settled, and her spirit had too. It was as if the pear had whispered, "You don't need to rush, I'll carry you softly." Over the next days, Daisy began eating pears more often. She took them on her walks with Marjorie, slicing them into small pieces they could share on the bench. Marjorie wrinkled her nose at first. "They're too plain," she said. Daisy just smiled and passed her a slice. After a few bites, Marjorie leaned back and admitted, "It's not flashy, but it feels good." Daisy nodded. Sometimes the quiet things hold the loudest power. They sat in silence after that, the pear's gentle sweetness lingering like a quiet hymn. Her son noticed her habit too. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, he pointed to the pear on her plate. "You really love those now, don't you?" Daisy nodded, smiling softly. "They keep me steady, not just in my body, but in my mind." He tilted his head curiously. "How so?" Daisy hesitated, searching for words. Finally, she said, "Because they remind me that I don't have to chase after loud answers. Sometimes the softest ones carry me the farthest." He didn't reply, but the way his eyes softened told her he understood. The pear soon became more than just a fruit to Daisy, it became a symbol. She realized her own life mirrored it in many ways, quiet, steady, often overlooked. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, never had been. She had lived much of her life in the background, shelving books as a librarian, tending roses in her garden, raising her children without fanfare. And yet, she realized, her quiet life had left the loudest impact on those she loved. Just like the pear, her strength wasn't in being bold, but in being steady. One evening, Daisy baked pears with a sprinkle of cinnamon, filling her kitchen with warmth. As she ate, she thought of her late husband. He too had been quiet, a man of few words, but great steadiness. His presence had been like the pear, not dramatic, but dependable, a sweetness that didn't fade. She closed her eyes and let the memory wash over her. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not of grief this time, but of gratitude. She whispered softly, "You were the pear in my life." Her granddaughter loved pears as well, mostly for their softness. "They're easy to eat," she said one afternoon, munching happily on a slice Daisy had given her. Daisy smiled. "Yes, they are, but don't mistake gentle for weak. Sometimes gentle is stronger than anything." The little girl nodded as though she understood, and Daisy felt her heart swell. She wasn't just passing down fruit, she was passing down wisdom, teaching her family that strength comes in many forms. In her journal, Daisy wrote, "Loud impact, quiet form, that's the pear's gift, and mine too." She realized then how much her diagnosis had shifted her perspective. She once thought healing required loud changes, dramatic diets, strict rules, harsh denials. But now she saw it was the quiet shifts that mattered most. Eating fruit with its skin, choosing slow sweetness, pairing snacks wisely. Each gentle change had built up, steady and strong, until her life itself felt transformed. Her doctor confirmed what she already felt in her body. At her checkup, he smiled at her results. "Your progress is remarkable, Daisy. Keep doing what you're doing." She nodded, but inside she thought about the pears waiting at home, the quiet companions that had helped carry her here. She wanted to tell him that sometimes the humblest things make the greatest difference, but she kept the thought to herself, savoring it like a secret. That night, Daisy sat on the porch with a pear in hand, watching the moon rise. Its glow was soft, not harsh, yet it lit the night all the same. She bit into the pear slowly, letting the juice linger on her tongue, and thought, "This is what strength feels like. Gentle, quiet, but undeniable." And as she finished the last slice, she realized that the humble fruit had indeed made the loudest impact, not just on her body, but on her soul. Daisy never thought her story would end this way. If someone had told her months ago that a basket of fruits and a handful of quiet changes would shape her life so deeply, she would have laughed and brushed it off. Back then, she had sat in a doctor's office, her heart sinking under the weight of a diagnosis she didn't fully understand. Fear had been her constant shadow, whispering that her body was failing and her best days were behind her. But now, as she stood in her kitchen on a gentle spring morning, slicing strawberries into a bowl, she felt something entirely different. Peace. Her counter looked like a palette of nature's brightest colors. Bananas, pears, kiwis, blueberries, apples, grapes. Each one carried a memory, a moment, a small shift that had added up to something big. She ran her hand across the fruit bowl and smiled. These weren't just foods anymore, they were chapters in her story, teachers in disguise. Every slice, every bite had led her here, to to steadiness, to clarity, to a new way of being alive. Daisy thought back to the long nights she once spent staring at the ceiling, fear churning in her chest. Those nights felt far away now. Her sleep came easier, her mornings lighter. Even her walks with Marjorie had changed, not in distance or speed, but in the way they both carried themselves, unhurried yet purposeful. "You're glowing lately," Marjorie had said just the week before, handing her a thermos of tea. Daisy only chuckled. She didn't feel like she was glowing. She felt like she was finally breathing in rhythm with her life. One afternoon, her granddaughter came bouncing into the kitchen, a pear clutched in her small hand. "Grandma, can you cut this for me?" Daisy took the fruit and paused, looking at her. "You know, sweetheart, you can eat the skin too. It's good for you." The little girl hesitated, then bit into it bravely. Juice dripped down her chin, and she giggled. Daisy laughed with her, feeling warmth rise in her chest. Watching her granddaughter enjoy the same simple things she had grown to love filled Daisy with a sense of continuity, as if her journey was becoming part of something larger than herself. Her son noticed it too. At dinner, he studied her plate and then her face. "Mom, I don't know what you've done, but you seem lighter, stronger." Daisy laid down her fork and smiled. "I stopped waiting for big miracles. I started choosing little ones every day." He nodded, his expression softening. For a moment, they didn't need more words. The pear on the table, the berries in the bowl, they spoke enough. The doctor's office, once a place of dread, had become one of reassurance. Her most recent visit left him pleased. "Your progress is steady, Daisy," he said, flipping through her chart. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Daisy only nodded, but inside she was thinking, "I'm not just keeping it up, I'm keeping myself up." For the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't simply surviving, she was living. That evening, Daisy sat by her garden with her journal open on her lap. The roses were blooming again, their petals curling open under the last golden light. She dipped her pen to the page and wrote, "Sweet endings are really beginnings in disguise. I thought illness was the end, but it taught me how to live again." She underlined it twice, feeling the truth settle inside her. As the sun set, Daisy carried a bowl of mixed fruit outside. Strawberries, kiwi slices, pear wedges, blueberries. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. The flavors mingled together, bright and sweet, sharp and gentle, a harmony of everything she had learned. She realized then that her story wasn't about one fruit, one change, or one miracle. It was about all of them woven together, the small choices, the quiet shifts, the moments of trust that had carried her through. Her granddaughter joined her on the porch, curling into her side. "Grandma," she asked softly, "what's your favorite fruit now?" Daisy looked at the bowl in her lap, at the child leaning against her, at the roses swaying in the evening breeze. She smiled. "Whichever one I'm sharing," she answered, and she meant it. That night, Daisy fell asleep with a heart unburdened. The sweet ending she never expected wasn't about food at all. It was about rediscovering herself, her strength, her peace, her joy. The fruits had only shown her the way, and as her breath deepened into sleep, she knew she had stepped into a new season of life, one she hadn't thought possible when her journey began. When Daisy first began her journey, she stood at a crossroads marked by fear and uncertainty. A diagnosis she didn't fully understand had shaken her, leaving her wondering if her best days were already behind her. In those early moments, every ache felt heavier, every sleepless night a little longer. Yet what she discovered, step by step, was that healing did not come in the form of dramatic changes or overwhelming rules. It came quietly through the simplest choices. Each fruit, each small habit became a marker of her transformation. Apples reminded her to embrace steadiness. Bananas offered energy when she felt weak. Kiwis and blueberries brought brightness and renewal. Grapes showed her the beauty of savoring sweetness slowly. And pears, the humblest of them all, taught her that gentleness carries the loudest strength. Along the way, she found not just physical steadiness, but also an emotional one, a deep peace she hadn't felt in years. Daisy's story is not only about food, it is about remembering that life, at any age, is still a series of beginnings. She learned that healing doesn't demand loud answers. It asks for quiet trust, steady steps, and the courage to begin again. And perhaps that is the most powerful truth of all. You don't need to wait for a miracle to change your life. You can begin with what's in your hands, right here, right now. So if you've been carrying fear or wondering if it's too late, remember, Daisy, remember that sweetness can return, strength can be rebuilt, and peace can be found. All it takes is one small choice today, a simple step toward the life you still deserve to live.